happily married?
Well, perhaps he's happy and you're married. While the odds are somewhat still in your favour, sadly, about 40% of marriages end in divorce.
Yeah, after the first of your failed marriages. How do you feel about getting back on the horse, and what if you blow it a second time?
How can we walk down the aisle of long-term happiness? Is it possible? And who would be crazy enough to go around again? Relationship expert Natalie Rinehart has written a book, The Mechanics of Women, so presumably she should know. Well, half the answers. Good morning.
Hello, Natalie.
Good morning.
Is this, firstly, what are the statistics? It's 40...
Somewhere between 43 and 50%, because you go on to different sort of research areas and so on. And
Sorry, of first marriages?
So first marriage,
yeah.
And about 60% of second marriages.
So it increases for second marriage?
It gets worse for second marriages.
It's not looking good for first marriages, really, if it's up to 50% or possibly.
Yep, around that area. Yep, 43 to 50%. And we're a little bit behind America. So, you know, America divorce rates are a bit higher than our own. So, and they're around about 50%. So we're sort of 43 to 50%, but we're quietly going up and up for our first marriages.
Why do we get it so wrong? What's happening?
Oh, well, I mean, there's a lot of reason why a first marriage might go wrong. I mean, it might be a case of infidelity. It might be a case that you're too young. You didn't really know what you wanted to do. You know, people change a lot during their 20s. So if people are getting married in their early 20s, then, you know, by the time they sort of hit 30 odd, they're like, oh, I really don't want to be with this person anymore.
So you, from those figures at least, you'd assume that people going into their second marriage are making the same mistakes.
Well,
worse mistakes.
You know, in some ways we kind of hope that they'd actually be more mature, that they'd actually say, okay, right, well, I've had a chance to reflect on what went wrong in my first marriage, and I've learnt my lessons, and I'm going to go on and
I don't mean to say, you know, make the same mistakes, you know, as in accusing them of doing something wrong, but it's in the marriage relationship, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah, and for a lot of people, if they haven't had time to really process what went wrong in their first marriage, they can actually bring those mistakes into their second marriage. Or if something, you know, if there was infidelity, for an example, in the first marriage, then in their next marriage they might be so hypersensitive about that they actually bring those problems, old problems from the first marriage, into their second marriage.
They haven't sorted through it.
Yeah.
And often there
Absolutely.
Other sorts of different sorts of reasons. I mean, people go into a second marriage often because I presume because they're lonely. And they're going, gosh, I must have someone in my life.
That might be a reason that some people do it. Absolutely. And I mean, obviously, going into a marriage just because you're lonely, that's not the right way to go about it. You've got to have the love. You've got to have the compatibility. Yes. And you know, you really do need that process time after experiencing a divorce or a breakup. And you know, the statistics actually say it takes generally about 2 years minimum to get over a broken down long-term relationship or marriage.
What did the statistics say about people going into another relationship and just cohabitating, as opposed to
getting married again? Well, I suppose it depends whether, you know, some people actually say, right, we have to be married for it to feel real, but in all reality, marriage in some ways is a piece of paper. So, you know, if you're actually in a long-term cohabitation situation and, say, have children, have your finances together and all that sort of thing, you are living the same life as what you would if you were married.
You are living a married life.
Exactly, you're living the married life. So I think really making that distinction between divorce or the end of a long-term relationship where you have been living like a married couple, we shouldn't really make that distinction because the impacts are the same.
All right, let's look at some steps that people can go through to try to recognise some of those problems that they might have experienced in their first marriage and hopefully not drag them into the second.
Compromise.
Compromise, absolutely. You've got to have your communication and your compromise. They're your key elements of any good marriage or good long-term relationship.
You see, people aren't going to want to hear that word, compromise.
No, well, especially because as we get a little bit older, this is a lot of the problem with the second marriages as well. As we get a little bit older, we're less likely to want to compromise. We're a bit more set in our ways. So compromise, especially, you know, something to keep in mind for the second marriage.
And sorry,
you go.
Also, if you're going into a second marriage, and you touched on this earlier, with children.
Yes, exactly what I was thinking.
Yes,
that's a real sort of, and particularly if you're taking children and the person you're about to hook up with has children as well.
Yeah, because actually blending a family, that's an awful lot of pressure to put on a relationship early on. You know, when you first get married, first time around or whatever, and you have a year or two at least without any kids generally, you know, you have time to get used to it. But, you know, bringing two families together and especially hoping that the kids are going to get along, kids are going to like the opposite parent, and all that sort of thing. So, you know, looking looking into ways to blend families successfully, and good step parenting techniques
and
are
I
really
guess
important.
not forcing the kids together.
Can't suddenly tell kids, righto, these are going to be your
Share a room.
step brother and step sister, like them.
Yeah,
Go
exactly.
on, like them.
Exactly. I love their parents, so therefore you must love them, and you must get along.
That's not
yeah,
real.
You can't force the issue. You've got to give them a bit of time to let their relationship grow gradually.
And of course, with that, there's also an ex-partner and the new partner, isn't there?
Yes. And one thing that I think is a really interesting point, actually, that my mother brought up when I was discussing this with her, and she said, watch how they are with their previous partner. Because if you ever break up, then that might be how you get treated. So if you're in a situation where you're not getting custody or maintenance payments, or custody issues with the children, or people are being particularly rude and particularly nasty and so on with their ex-partner, you might be in that situation later on. So you really need to think about what sort of person you're getting together with. Because I mean, let's face it, divorce or breaking up in a relationship really does bring out the worst in us.
What if you've got a prenup?
A prenup? Yep. Well, prenups, they're very, very different sort of feelings for different people.
They're
about
there
prenups.
Specifically for breaking up, aren't they?
Yep,
It's
exactly.
like, hang on, before we get into this, let's sort out getting out of this.
Yep. And in some ways, you can actually see the logic in doing that, in actually setting up. But of course, prenups are also considered remarkably, unromantic.
Sure.
And
sometimes accusatory.
Yes, absolutely. And, a lot about having a lack of trust or a lack of commitment to the marriage even before you've actually walked down the aisle. So it does bring up a lot of strong feelings for people. But if it's actually sorted out well and truly before the wedding date, so it's not a case it's thrust upon you, 1 week before your big day. But if it's something that, both people within a couple want to do, then, it's not a bad thing to do.
Is it legally binding in Australia?
Not so much, no. It's taken into consideration in the family court. I'm not exactly sure about all the legal bits, but I did actually find some information, and it's not so much legally binding, but family court and so on will take a lot of the things into account that are within them.
All right, Natalie.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Very interesting.
My pleasure.
Nice to see you.
Tangible tips there for people trying to battle that blended family thing too. All right, plenty more to come at 9 a.m. right after this.